The lawyer's words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. To my daughter Sarah, I leave the entirety of the Blackwood Ranch, all 8,000 acres, the house, the equipment, and all livestock. 25 years. 25 years I'd worked that land from sunup to sundown, my hands cracked and bleeding, my back bent over every fence post, every sick calf, every broken tractor. 25 years of believing I was building something, earning something, proving myself worthy of the legacy that had been in our family for 4 generations. But as I sat in that sterile conference room watching my sister, who hadn't set foot on the ranch in 15 years, try to hide her shock, I realized I'd been living a lie. The worst part wasn't even the inheritance. It was what came next. The lawyer cleared his throat and continued reading Dad's will. To my son Jake, I leave nothing of the ranch, as he has already taken more than his share and has proven himself unworthy of the Blackwood name. The room went silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Sarah's face went pale. Mom started crying. And me? I just sat there, numb, trying to process how the man who taught me to ride, to rope, to read the weather and the land, could believe I was unworthy of everything I'd given my life to protect. That was 3 months ago. This is the story of how I learned the truth about family, about land, and about the price of secrets that can destroy everything you thought you knew about the people you love. I was born into ranching the way some kids are born into money or music. The Blackwood Ranch had been in our family since 1923, when my great-grandfather bought 8,000 acres of prime Montana grassland for what would be pocket change today. Dad used to tell me stories about how great-grandpa Jake, yes, I was named after him, had started with nothing but a dream and a willingness to work harder than any man should have to work. Those stories shaped me. They made me believe that hard work and dedication were the only currencies that mattered on the ranch. From the time I could walk, I was following Dad around like a shadow. While other kids were playing video games or watching cartoons, I was learning to check fence lines, identify sick cattle, and fix machinery with nothing but baling wire and determination. Dad never made it feel like work. He made it feel like I was learning the most important skills in the world. "This land will be yours someday, son," he'd say, wiping grease from his hands onto his worn jeans. "But you've got to earn it first." Sarah was different. 3 years younger than me, she was always more interested in books than barns, more fascinated by the world beyond our property lines than the world within them. Dad didn't push her the way he pushed me. "Girls have choices," he'd say when Mom would suggest Sarah help with chores. "Boys have responsibilities." I never questioned it. It seemed natural that I would inherit the ranch and Sarah would find her own path. After all, she was the one who couldn't wait to leave for college, who talked constantly about cities and careers and adventures that had nothing to do with cattle or crops. By the time I turned 16, I was doing the work of a grown man. Dad had taught me to operate every piece of equipment on the ranch, from the ancient John Deere tractor that required a prayer and a curse to start each morning, to the newer hay baler that still broke down more often than it worked. I could deliver a calf in a blizzard, repair a broken water line in the middle of the night, and calculate feed costs in my head while driving fence posts into ground so hard it felt like concrete. School was just something I had to endure between the real work of the ranch. My grades were decent enough, but my heart was never in those classrooms. While my classmates worried about prom dates and college applications, I was planning crop rotations and calculating how many head of cattle we could support on the north pasture. My teachers would ask about my plans for the future, and I'd always give the same answer. I'm going to run the family ranch. It wasn't a dream or an aspiration. It was simply a fact, as certain as sunrise. Sarah, meanwhile, was the star student our parents bragged about to anyone who would listen. Honor roll every semester, student council president, accepted to 3 different universities with partial scholarships. The night she graduated as valedictorian, Dad was so proud he actually cried during her speech. I was proud too, but I also felt something else, a small, ugly feeling I didn't want to name. It wasn't jealousy exactly, but it was close. I wondered if Dad had ever looked at me with that same pride, that same amazement. When people asked him about his kids, he always talked about Sarah's achievements first. I was always an afterthought. And Jake's doing real good helping out on the ranch. The day Sarah left for college, the ranch felt different, quieter somehow, even though she'd never been particularly involved in the daily operations. Dad drove her to the airport in Billings, and when he came back that evening, he seemed older. Mom cried for 3 days straight, wandering around the house like she'd lost something precious and couldn't remember where she'd put it. "It's just us men now," Dad said that first night, settling into his recliner with a beer and the farm report. But instead of feeling like a promotion, it felt like a consolation prize. I was the son who stayed, not the son who was chosen. Still, I threw myself into the work with even more determination. If I couldn't make Dad proud with scholarships and speeches, I'd make him proud with sweat and results. The ranch prospered under our partnership. We expanded the herd, improved our breeding program, and invested in better equipment. I learned the business side, too, negotiating with feed suppliers, managing contracts with beef processors, navigating the maze of agricultural regulations that seemed to change every year. Dad started introducing me as his partner instead of his helper, and that meant everything to me. Sarah came home for Christmas and summer breaks those first few years, but each visit felt more strained. She'd grown sophisticated in ways that made our dinner table conversations feel awkward. She'd talk about her classes, her internships, her plans to move to Denver or maybe even New York after graduation. Dad would listen politely, but I could see him struggling to relate to this new version of his daughter. When she'd ask about the ranch, it felt like polite small talk rather than genuine interest. She was becoming someone else, someone who belonged to a world that had nothing to do with ours. After Sarah graduated and moved to Denver for a marketing job, her visits became even less frequent, holidays only, and sometimes not even then. She'd call Mom every few weeks, but those conversations were brief and felt obligatory. Dad stopped mentioning her much, except to say things like, "Well, Sarah's got her own life now," in a tone that suggested he'd made peace with losing her to the outside world. I, meanwhile, was building my life around the ranch in ways that went far beyond just work. I married Jenny Morrison, a local girl whose family ran a smaller operation about 20 miles south of us. Our wedding reception was held in the big barn, with half the county in attendance. Dad gave a toast that night that still makes me emotional when I think about it. He talked about how proud he was to see me carrying on the family tradition, how he knew the ranch would be in good hands for another generation. Jenny and I moved into the old foreman's house on the property, a small but comfortable place that we slowly fixed up together. We painted every room, refinished the hardwood floors, and planted a garden that Jenny tended with the same care I gave to the cattle. We were happy in a simple, uncomplicated way that I thought would last forever. We talked about kids, about expanding the house, about growing old together on the land that had shaped me. The ranch continued to thrive. We weathered droughts and market downturns, celebrated good years, and learned from bad ones. I implemented new technologies, GPS systems for the tractors, improved irrigation methods, better record-keeping software. Dad was impressed by my innovations, even if he sometimes grumbled about all these computers. I felt like I was honoring the past while building toward the future, exactly what a good steward of the land should do. The first sign that something was wrong came during a particularly brutal winter when I was 32. We'd lost power for 3 days during an ice storm, and I'd been working around the clock to keep the livestock alive. I hadn't slept more than 2 hours at a stretch, surviving on coffee and adrenaline while breaking ice on water troughs and hauling hay through knee-deep snow. On the third night, I collapsed in the barn, just fell over like a tree, unconscious before I hit the ground. Jenny found me an hour later and somehow managed to get me to the hospital in town. Exhaustion, the doctor said. Dehydration. My body had simply given up. I spent 2 days in the hospital, and when I got home, I expected Dad to be concerned, maybe even grateful for everything I'd been doing to keep the operation running. Instead, he was angry. "You can't run a ranch if you're dead, Jake," he said, but there was something else in his voice, something that sounded almost like disappointment. A real rancher knows his limits. The words stung more than they should have. I'd nearly killed myself keeping his cattle alive, and somehow that made me less of a rancher in his eyes, not more. Jenny started suggesting that maybe we needed to hire more help, that I was taking on too much responsibility, but Dad dismissed the idea. "The ranch has always been run by family," he said. "We don't need outsiders." When I pointed out that we could afford it, that the operation was profitable enough to support additional wages, he just shook his head. "You'll understand when it's your ranch," he said, but I was starting to wonder if it ever really would be. The marriage started falling apart slowly, then all at once. Jenny had always known she was marrying a rancher, but I don't think she understood what that really meant until we'd been living it for several years. The ranch wasn't just my job, it was my identity, my purpose, my entire world. There was no separation between Jake the husband and Jake the rancher, and that left very little room for anything else. She wanted to travel, to take vacations, to have experiences beyond the boundaries of our 8,000 acres. I couldn't understand why anyone would want to leave paradise to go sit on some crowded beach or walk through noisy cities. She wanted children, but I kept putting it off, saying we needed to wait until the ranch was more stable, until we had more money saved, until the timing was better. The truth was, I was afraid of dividing my attention, afraid that anything that took focus away from the ranch would be seen as weakness by Dad. The fights became more frequent and more bitter. She accused me of caring more about the cattle than about her. I accused her of not understanding what we were building together. She said I was becoming just like my father, obsessed with the land to the exclusion of everything else. I said that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. That was the fight that ended it all. Jenny left on a Tuesday morning in March, while I was out checking on the spring calves. I came home to find a note on the kitchen table and half the furniture gone. She'd taken her grandmother's china, her clothes, and the dog we'd rescued as a puppy 3 years earlier. The house felt cavernous without her things, without her laughter, without the smell of her coffee in the morning. Dad's only comment when I told him was, "Well, I guess she wasn't cut out for ranch life after all." He said it like it was her failing, not mine. After Jenny left, I threw myself into the ranch with an intensity that bordered on obsession. I worked 18-hour days, 7 days a week, treating every task like it was a matter of life and death. I expanded our operation, taking on more debt to buy better breeding stock and newer equipment. I negotiated contracts that locked in better prices for our beef. I implemented efficiency improvements that increased our profit margins by 15%. Dad seemed pleased with my dedication, but there was still something distant about his approval. He'd nod when I showed him the quarterly reports, grunt his satisfaction when I told him about a successful calving season, but I never felt like I was truly measuring up to whatever standard he had in his head. Sometimes I'd catch him looking at me with an expression I couldn't read, not disappointment exactly, but not pride either. More like he was trying to solve a puzzle and couldn't quite make the pieces fit. Sarah called more frequently during this period, usually talking to Mom, but occasionally asking to speak with me. She'd heard about the divorce through the family grapevine and wanted to make sure I was okay. Her concern felt genuine, but it also felt like something she thought she was supposed to do rather than something she actually wanted to do. Our conversations were stilted, full of long pauses and careful politeness. "You could come visit me in Denver," she offered once. "Take a break from the ranch. See the city." The suggestion was so foreign to me that I actually laughed. Take a break from the ranch? During calving season? It was like suggesting I take a break from breathing. I explained that I couldn't leave, that the cattle depended on me, that Dad needed me there. There was a long silence on the other end of the line before she said, "Okay, Jake, I understand." But her tone suggested she didn't understand at all. Chapter 9. Dad gets sick. The cancer diagnosis came on a Thursday in late September, just as we were finishing the fall roundup. Dad had been complaining about stomach pain for weeks, but he'd dismissed it as nothing more than stress and too much coffee. Mom finally convinced him to see a doctor when he started losing weight and couldn't keep food down. The news hit our family like a lightning strike on a clear day. Stage 3 pancreatic cancer. The oncologist was kind but direct about the prognosis. With treatment, Dad might have 18 months. Without it, maybe 6. Dad chose treatment, but more for Mom's sake than his own. He'd seen what cancer could do to a man, and he wasn't optimistic about his chances. I took over more of the ranch operations as Dad went through chemotherapy. The treatments left him weak and nauseated, unable to do much more than sit in his truck and watch me work. Sometimes I'd catch him staring out at the pastures with an expression of profound sadness, like he was already saying goodbye. When I asked if he wanted to talk about transitioning ownership of the ranch, he'd wave me off. "Plenty of time for that," he'd say. "Let's focus on getting through this first." Sarah came home more often during Dad's illness, flying in from Denver every few weeks to spend time with him. I was grateful for her presence, even though it sometimes felt awkward. She'd help Mom with the cooking and cleaning, sit with Dad during his worst days, and try to keep everyone's spirits up with stories from her life in the city. But I noticed she never asked about the ranch operations, never showed interest in learning about the business that had defined our family for generations. It was like she was visiting a museum of her childhood rather than engaging with a living, breathing enterprise. Chapter 10. The Final Months. Dad's condition deteriorated faster than anyone expected. By Christmas, he was spending most of his time in bed, too weak to do much more than watch television and doze. The ranch felt different without his presence. Quieter, somehow less substantial. I found myself making decisions I'd never had to make before, handling responsibilities that had always been his domain. During one of his better days in January, Dad asked me to drive him around the property. We took the old pickup truck, moving slowly along the fence lines and through the pastures where our cattle grazed on winter hay. He didn't say much, just pointed occasionally at a particular spot and shared a memory, where he'd built his first fence as a young man, where he'd found a lost calf during a blizzard, where he'd proposed to Mom 45 years earlier. "This land has been good to us," he said as we sat on a hill overlooking the entire ranch. "It's given us everything we needed and more, but it's demanding too. It takes everything you've got and then asks for more." He was quiet for a long moment, watching a hawk circle overhead. "I hope you understand that, son. I hope you know what you're getting into." I assured him that I did, that I'd been preparing for this responsibility my entire life. But something in his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. He nodded slowly and asked me to drive him back to the house. That was the last time he left the property. Sarah took a leave of absence from her job to be with Dad during his final weeks. She slept in her old room and spent hours sitting by his bedside, reading to him or just holding his hand. I was grateful for her presence, but I also felt like an outsider in my own family. She and Dad seemed to have conversations that I wasn't part of, shared moments that excluded me. When I asked her about it, she just said they were talking about old times, nothing important. Chapter 11. The Funeral. Dad died on a Tuesday morning in March, with Mom and Sarah by his side. I was in the barn, delivering a calf that had been breached, and by the time I got to the house, he was gone. The funeral was held at the Methodist church in town, the same church where he'd been married, where Sarah and I had been baptized, where 4 generations of Blackwoods had marked the major moments of their lives. The church was packed with ranchers, farmers, feed store owners, veterinarians, and neighbors from across 3 counties. Dad had been respected in the community, known for his integrity and his willingness to help others during hard times. Person after person stood up to share stories about his generosity, his wisdom, his dedication to the land and to his family. I gave the eulogy, talking about Dad's love for the ranch and his commitment to preserving it for future generations. I spoke about the lessons he'd taught me, the values he'd instilled, the legacy he was leaving behind. But even as I said the words, I felt like I was performing a role rather than speaking from the heart. There was so much I didn't understand about my father, so many conversations we'd never had, so many questions I'd never thought to ask. After the service, we gathered at the ranch for a reception. The house was full of people sharing memories and offering condolences. Sarah moved through the crowd with grace, accepting hugs and kind words with a composure that impressed me. She seemed to know exactly what to say, how to make people feel comfortable, how to honor Dad's memory while also taking care of Mom's needs. I found myself standing alone on the front porch, watching the sun set over the pastures where Dad had spent his life. The land looked the same as it always had, but everything felt different. I was 38 years old, and for the first time in my life, I was truly responsible for the ranch. It should have felt like a triumph, like the culmination of everything I'd worked for. Instead, it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, unsure whether the ground beneath my feet was solid or about to give way. Chapter 12. The Will. Reading. The lawyer's office was smaller than I'd expected, with wood paneling and leather-bound books that were probably more for show than for reference. Mr. Patterson had been Dad's attorney for 20 years, handling everything from property disputes to tax planning. He was a thin man with gray hair and kind eyes, the sort of person you'd trust with your deepest secrets. Mom, Sarah, and I sat in chairs arranged in a semicircle facing his desk. The atmosphere was somber but not particularly tense. We all assumed we knew what the will would say. The ranch would go to me with some provision for Mom's care and maybe a cash settlement for Sarah. It was what made sense, what we'd all been expecting for years. Mr. Patterson cleared his throat and began reading. The first part was standard, specific bequests to various charities, personal items distributed among family members, arrangements for Mom's financial security. Then he got to the main event, the disposition of the ranch property. To my daughter Sarah, I leave the entirety of the Blackwood Ranch, all 8,000 acres, the house, all buildings, equipment, livestock, and associated assets. The words seemed to hang in the air like smoke. I felt my chest tighten, my breathing become shallow. This had to be a mistake. Some error in the paperwork, some misunderstanding that would be cleared up momentarily. But Mr. Patterson continued reading, and the next words hit me like a physical blow. To my son Jake, I leave nothing of the ranch, as he has already taken more than his share and has proven himself unworthy of the Blackwood name. The room went completely silent. I could hear my own heartbeat, the tick of the clock on the wall, the distant sound of traffic outside. Sarah's face had gone pale. Mom was crying quietly. And I just sat there trying to process what I'd just heard, trying to understand how my entire life had just been erased with a few sentences on a piece of paper. Chapter 13. The Truth Revealed. The rest of the will reading passed in a blur. There were explanations about trusts and tax implications, discussions about transition timelines and legal procedures, but I couldn't focus on any of it. All I could think about was that phrase, proven himself unworthy of the Blackwood name. What did that even mean? How had I proven myself unworthy? By working every day of my adult life to build and preserve the ranch. By sacrificing my marriage, my health, my entire identity for the sake of the family legacy. After Mr. Patterson finished reading, Sarah was the first to speak. "There has to be some mistake," she said, her voice shaky. "Dad always said the ranch would go to Jake. He's the one who's been running it, who knows everything about it. I don't even—" She trailed off, looking at me with an expression of genuine distress. Mr. Patterson shook his head sadly. "I'm afraid there's no mistake. Your father was very clear about his intentions. He rewrote this will 6 months ago after his diagnosis. He spent a lot of time thinking about it." He paused, then reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a sealed envelope. "He did leave this for you, Jake. He asked me to give it to you after the will was read." My hands were shaking as I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter in Dad's careful handwriting, the same script I'd seen on countless notes about cattle prices and weather forecasts over the years. The letter was short, but every word felt like a knife. "Son, I know this will come as a shock, but I had to do what I thought was right. The ranch has always been about family, about passing something meaningful to the next generation. But you've made it clear that the land is more important to you than the people who love you. You chose the ranch over your wife, over your own happiness, over everything that makes life worth living. That's not the legacy I want to leave behind. Sarah may not know cattle, but she knows how to love people, how to build relationships, how to create a life that's about more than just work. Maybe she can find a way to honor the land while also honoring the human connections that make it all worthwhile. I'm sorry it had to be this way. I hope someday you'll understand. Dad." I read the letter 3 times before the words really sank in. Then I folded it carefully, put it back in the envelope, and walked out of that office into a world that no longer made any sense. Sarah called after me, but I didn't stop. I got in my truck and drove back to the ranch that was no longer mine, and sat in the driveway, staring at the house where I'd grown up, the barns where I'd learned to work, the pastures where I'd planned to spend the rest of my life. That was 3 months ago. Sarah has been trying to figure out what to do with the ranch, talking to agricultural consultants and ranch management companies. She's offered to let me stay on as manager, to keep running the operation while she maintains ownership. It's a generous offer, more generous than I probably deserve. But I can't do it. I can't work land that I'll never own, can't build something that will never really be mine. So I'm leaving, selling what little I have, packing up my life, and starting over somewhere else. Maybe Dad was right. Maybe I did choose the ranch over everything else that mattered. Maybe I am unworthy of the Blackwood name, but I'm going to find out who Jake Blackwood is when he's not defined by 8,000 acres of Montana grassland. It's terrifying and liberating at the same time. Thank you for listening to my story. I know it's not the ending anyone expected, least of all me. If you're out there listening to this, I'd love to know where you're hearing it from, what corner of the world you're in, what your own story might be. And if you found something meaningful in my experience, please consider subscribing to the channel. Sometimes the most important stories are the ones that don't have happy endings, the ones that force us to question everything we thought we knew about family, loyalty, and what it really means to earn your place in this world.